welcome to my podcast, my YouTube channel. I'm glad you're here. Today, I have a guest called Kellie Woof. She's an author, and we were actually talking about this. I mean, how much fun it is to say I'm an author and how proud we feel of our books. Yeah, she's talking from Colorado, the mountains of Colorado. I'm
Hmm.
very glad she's here. As you know, my guests, we always talk about suicide and mental health related issues. And what brings us here today, the focus of our conversation will be to talk about couples who go through the loss of a child by
Hmm.
suicide, which is, I mean, losing a child is hard enough, it's painful enough, but suicide adds, and this is something that we cover on the podcast all the time, just adds this extra layers of shame and guilt and the stigma associated with it. And this, in her journey was really, really hard because we talked a little bit before we recorded. I usually do that with my guests just to make sure that it will be beneficial to my audience because that's why we do this. But Kellie, I'm so grateful you're here. She is an author. She just published her book, and she actually talks about Chris. That's the child that they lost to suicide, and he is part of the story, right?
Hmm. He
Yeah,
is.
we
Hi,
will.
Paula.
Hi, Kellie. Good to see you again.
And you as well. I'm glad
uh,
to be here.
Yeah, we will talk about the book at the end for those who are
Sure.
interested. I mean, he's part of the story, but I was really touched by your story of surviving the marriage, surviving what was so hard to go through. And from what I remember, you and your husband, Steve, you
Hmm.
were on such different paths and that
Yeah,
was like an extra layer of challenge there, right? So
it
Kellie,
was.
first of all, tell me how you're doing. How was your day? How was your week? How are you feeling being here with us and talking about Chris?
I'm always honored to talk about Chris. Not everybody wants to, as you know, and your audience knows that sometimes your community and your colleagues and even distant family members don't really bring up the person that you lost. They don't quite know what to say, and they're afraid you're going to hurt if
Mm-hmm.
they talk about it. And so I'm in the middle of a book tour, and so I'm excited about that sort of fresh, creative opportunity. But anytime I get to stop and talk about Chris, it's an honor and a blessing to me. So I thank you for that. And you're right, not all couples experience this kind of divided response to this loss. But I think that my story might provide some hope on the other end of it, even when you're on two different planets, as you sort of implied. But yeah, I'm glad to be here. And I have mixed feelings of excitement, but also just a sober spirit that gets to speak, honestly and authentically about our loss. So thank you for
Yeah,
asking.
yeah, it's never easy, is it? I mean, even though you know the importance of it and how much you reach people and you help, and that's the whole point why we're here. I
Yeah.
remember when we talked and you were telling me your story, we actually didn't know, I mean, what were we talking about? Because I already had parents here talk about the loss of a child. And
Hmm.
once you started telling me the story of the healing story of you and your husband, I said, wow, that's one of the topics that we have not covered here. So that would be, and so many parents go through that and they feel so alone even within the marriage. They feel
Yeah.
alone with
Yeah.
their pain, and that's kind of what happened to you.
Yeah.
You were trying to go one direction. You were kind of going out. It seems like to me, you're kind of getting out of that pain, trying to heal yourself. And he was kind of bringing it in and keeping it inside
Right.
and not going through very healthy avenues in terms of healing. And that
Hmm.
was really, really tough on you and your family.
You're
And
right.
that's okay. And that's okay. We're not saying this is the right way or the wrong way. We
Hmm.
know how grief goes. So what we decided to do was let's help couples, those who are
Hmm.
listening, and who may be struggling and feeling so distant from their partners. Let's help them bring them together. So that's what we're going to
I'll
do.
do my best. And I really applaud what you're doing. I think the therapeutic, psychological, emotional um, ramifications of conversation like this are really, really powerful. And I'm privileged to be a part of it.
Thank you. Thank you. So let's talk about Chris first. Tell me a little
Yeah.
bit about him.
My husband and I have been married 35 years, and we have 3 natural born children, and we adopted 2 teenagers. And Chris was one of those that we adopted. He moved into our house at 14, and we adopted him at 15. And of course, his story didn't begin there. He had a full life before we got him in foster care. And he was found in Wichita at 3 years old, drunk and naked, and his feet were all cut up, and he was put into foster care, and a lot of unfortunate things happened to him in foster care for those 9 years, and a very unfair amount of traumatic experiences. So he came to us with some emotional trauma, PTSD baggage, right? And so we adopted him at age 15, and he went through high school relatively successfully. He got a football scholarship. And after one semester, he couldn't quite handle the freedom that college afforded and realized he was making some bad choices. So he joined the Army, and he did really good in the Army until, again, he began to have money and free time. And that's when he began to really actively run from his PTSD traumas that he had as a child, and was started using drugs and alcohol. And he did that for years. He was in and out of rehab, in and out of jail, in and out of hospitals with overdoses. And it was really, really hard as his parents to watch the person that you love fight this demon that we can't fight for him. And so sadly, you have to say no to your addicted child when they ask for favors or money. And we're encouraging, we're supportive. But for someone who can't handle the freedom of money, we had to say no a lot. And so he was doing pretty well. He was at another halfway house. He was 6 weeks sober, age 24. And we told him, this is the summer, July of 2020, we told him, if you can remain sober until Christmas, we'll bring you out to Colorado. You can stay with us and live with us, and we'll be your support system. But we need a little success under your belt first. And we think this halfway house is the place for it. So he was doing well there with the promise of reuniting as a family. This is the summer of 2020, so COVID was very, very serious. Schools had shut down. Black Lives Matter protests were going on. Just to give you a picture of what was happening that summer. My husband is a superintendent of schools. And that means that in July, they were already trying to figure out if they were going to have classrooms and schedules. And he had to work out hybrid and Zoom and systems in place to quarantine and air purifiers in the classrooms and masks, no masks, the whole debate. One day the sheriff walked in and notified them that they found our son, that he had ended his life in an alley in Wichita, and that it took 3 days for them to identify him, but they know for a fact that he had taken his life because there was security video footage of it. And so we drove back to Kansas and picked up the remains of our son and brought him home. And that's not how we wanted to bring him back to Colorado, but it is how it happened. And so this is what happened next. I laid down on the bed or the couch and didn't move and tried very, very hard not to feel anything. I thought maybe I could sleep through this pain. My husband had to go to work exactly the same day. He as soon as we got back, he still had entire plans and systems and trainings to go through. He had no time to grieve whatsoever. And so he began to drink whiskey, and that was unusual for him. And it scared me, but I was on the couch trying not to feel, so I wasn't paying any attention. 6 weeks later, I get a phone call from a game show. Ellen DeGeneres had a game show called Game of Games, and I had 2 years prior auditioned for this game show. And completely forgot about it. COVID had happened and I had retired and moved out of state. And I had sent an audition tape. My students at my old school, I was director of a program at a high school. They helped me create this audition tape. And I got this call and they said, we would really like to consider you for this game show. Would you mind talking to our producers in the casting department? Well, I'm on the couch. I can't even shower. I don't even know how I'm going to be on TV and be a cheerleader and have joy and express myself authentically. And so, long story short, I took advantage of it. And so 6 weeks after, pardon me, Chris passed away, I am flying to Los Angeles, and I we were the very first TV production going on at the Warner Brothers set in Los Angeles. And so they were very serious. They were full hazmat, like the booties and the gown and the visor and the mask and the caps. And all of the contestants were isolated. There was no audience. And so I was quarantined in my room for 6 days. And I had a hotel room and had to have 4 COVID tests before they would even let me on the set. And so I sat there for 6 days going, I've got to figure out what to do, because when I was laying on the couch from the outside looking in, it may have looked like mourning, but I actually wasn't dealing with anything. Steve was drinking to avoid his feelings. I was doing the exact same thing, just trying to sit really still. So I made an intentional choice in that hotel room to look pain right in the face and invite all my memories in, because that was going to force me to mourn and it was going to force me to have joy at the same time. And so I meditated and I prayed and I slept and I tried to eat and I practiced talking and I journaled and really leaned hard into my mourning. And what came of that was I began to have this kind of sacred imagination of Chris being with me. Chris was my most celebratory, my most enthusiastic, my biggest hype man for anything. And he would be thrilled to death that I was doing this. So I just imagined him kind of around me and being excited for me and being my cheerleader. And so, long story short, I won the game. And at the very end of the week, they only have a handful of winners left. The hotel's completely empty. And I won $75,000. And I was able to express myself authentically playful and happy because I imagined Chris there with me.
So that helped
So,
you kind of bring yourself. Can I just go back a little bit?
yes, of course.
Okay, so I'm just listening to you and just looking for the signs, like the early signs of the divide, right, between you and your husband. So
Yeah, it's coming.
in the beginning, you were kind of together. Both of you were trying to not feel, right? Self-medication. For him, it was alcohol. For you, it was just staying still, right? You
Right.
just stood there and it was kind of numbing for you. So no, this is not
Yes.
happening, kind of a denial phase. And then comes this show, right? Which is very hard
Yeah.
because, I mean, who plays after their kid dies,
I know.
especially, right?
It really forced me to
Mhm.
face this, because I knew that if I tried to fake it would be obvious to everyone who knew me and probably the strangers too. And so it forced me to
To face your
look.
grief.
Yes. And
Yeah,
so,
but I'm also thinking about the fact, I mean, from the outside, were people okay with you going out, leave, quote unquote, leaving your family behind at the time when you guys maybe, and I'm just talking about all these societal expectations and of
yeah,
course preconceptions that have no base in reality really, because we all grieve
right,
differently. But was
right.
that maybe the beginning of the conflict? I mean, was your husband, for example, okay with you leaving?
Yeah, he completely was, because then he
Mm,
could concentrate completely on his work and not have to check on or
okay.
babysit me. And after Chris's death, we were pretty isolated. We didn't
Mm,
have a funeral right away because I have children on other parts of the United States. And so we were going to have a memorial service at Christmas time. And so his urn was on our table and school was about to start. This is now August. And no, he was fine. I was gone and nobody knew I was really leaving except for my children and my parents. It didn't air until the next year. And so people really didn't catch that this was happening at the same time. So after the win, the sort of limo driver is taking me back to the hotel room and I am trying to get a hold of Steve quickly, right? Because I have this news. Not only was I able to play authentically, but I also won. Where are you? I want to tell you what happened. And he wasn't answering me and I was getting really frustrated. And I kept saying, look, I want to tell our kids and everybody, but I want to tell you first, so please respond. And I got a very short email or text message that says, I'll be with you in just a second. I'm almost ready, right? And it wasn't until the next day that I realized he was in trouble. At the exact same moment that I was on stage playing and winning, he was in an accident. And he had a DUI and he was arrested. And all of that was going on at the exact same moment, which is why he couldn't reach me. And so you can't be a superintendent of schools and this be a secret. He was on the front page of a newspaper, superintendent arrested for DUI, suspended from job. It was in the Denver news on TV, on Colorado Springs news. It was a lot. And so I came home higher than high, right? Because it's not that I was healed. It was that I had hope again. And that I thought, okay, I can link arms with my family and breathe life into their lungs. And I realize now that I can be a catalyst for healing when I got home. But when I got home and realized he wasn't in the place to receive it, and in fact, he was in really big trouble, I kind of got the wind knocked out of me again. And I was resentful that I worked really hard on getting to this place. And now we're dealing with this very public, very embarrassing, very shame-filled experience. And so now we really are in a fork in a road and I'm going left and he's going right. And I don't know how to reconnect again because I was experiencing something completely different than him. And he was so in his shame and so embarrassed and so full of embarrassed. The irony that our son, who was addicted, and then him becoming someone who is dependent on alcohol. Of course, he stopped drinking immediately. Yes. And thankfully, the court system was able to offer him a diversion, which is a long process. It's about a year-long process that included counseling. Now, I realized that I was resentful to him for kind of robbing me of the work that I had done. And when I got that money, that $75,000, I told Ellen DeGeneres that I was going to put it down as a down payment on our house. And I didn't want to do that anymore because our house was a mess, right? Our house was falling apart at the foundations and I wanted it to be mine. I earned that through my healing. I felt like this resentment, of course, but so I bought a tombstone for our son. And I bought myself a little used car and then I gave the rest of it away. And I acknowledge that's not practical for a family who's lost a job and it didn't make any sense at the time. But again, it's very indicative of the two places that we were, right? I didn't even take into consideration that money might be helpful in some other ways, including paying for his attorney and his court costs and stuff. I just didn't want to do it. And so I gave the money away to the students who helped me make the video. I had some single mom students that I had worked with and was so proud of, some teachers who helped me with the video production, and then lastly, my kids. And I have no regrets about that, but I acknowledge, just between you and me and your audience.
And your audience.
Yeah, that it came from a genuine place of gratitude, but also resentment because we were not together. Yeah. So we had to really begin to create a place where we either were going to have to let this house crumble to the ground, metaphorically, or we're going to have to be intentional about it. And so we created a plan. And it was awkward and it was uncomfortable and it wasn't at all easily to agree upon, but we kind of have a 4-step plan for this.
Can I just interrupt a little bit because
of course.
I know what's what you mean to do. You want to tell the story.
Yeah.
But I just want to know, okay, so you come back. I'm going back
Hmm.
again.
That's okay. You can take me
So
wherever you want to
you come
go.
back. You come back, and as you said, your house was, it was interesting to me, the choice of words that you had. Your house was crumbling. So you didn't want to invest the money that came from such a joyful experience into
Hmm.
something that was
Hmm.
being destroyed, right?
Yeah.
But at the same
Perfectly said.
time, yeah, but at the same time, when you said that, the way it landed on me was, but it was crumbling for a while. Maybe you just couldn't see it.
Maybe. Maybe.
Yeah.
I mean, it's hard to remember my life before Chris's loss in some ways, right? It feels
Mm,
like a million years ago, even though it was only 2 years ago. And so, you know, I was very comfortable in my quote unquote retirement, right? I was writing a book. I was learning how to play guitar. My parents lived with us. And so I felt very secure in my life.
mm,
And so when I came back home and the foundation had cracked, right? I no longer feel secure.
mm,
Then crumbling becomes the word that and you're
mm,
right, I didn't like, my money isn't going to fix a crumbling,
mm.
home, just to play the metaphor further. And so I, I'm, I forget that you have skills of observation and and that you probably can see my physical sort of and word choice about stuff. And so
Yeah.
I'm always
This
intrigued when people stop me and go, hey, did you notice that you kind of
that
did
you
this?
just
So
said that. No, because I'm just and I'm not even going back before Chris died. I'm
yeah.
thinking about how painful and how your husband was grieving, and it seems like you were very distant at that point. You
Yes.
made you made
Yes.
you made the decision to go to do this game, and but you are not talking about this. You are not together in the grief. You are not
Absolutely.
holding hands. And maybe we do weird things. Our minds are crazy. Maybe that was his way of shaking the house and saying, you know what, Kelly, it's not just you. Look at me.
Yeah. Yeah. And the truth is it was painful to look at each other in our pain, right?
Mm,
It was painful for me to see him drinking, and it was painful for him to see me on the couch trying to sleep through this all, right? And so it was probably a relief to get me out of the house, to be honest. And so
yeah.
yeah, you're absolutely right, it was crumbling before I returned.
Yeah, yeah. But it's a very hard place to come back to, for sure. So when was there like a moment when you came back? Of course, I'm sure you were angry as can be, right?
Oh
Resentful.
yeah.
Yeah,
Oh
I'm
yeah.
sure. But when was the moment when you guys sat down and said, "Okay, we have to make a choice now. Are we going we're going to separate? Are we going to work on this? Are you going, do I have your, I'm sure for him in his mind was like, do I have your support through this? Because he lost his job, right?
Right,
Here,
right,
here is a man who lost his job, and we know what a job means to a man, right?
right. And
It's
very
their
publicly.
identity very publicly. So I'm sure he was going through hell, and I'm sure he was wondering, do I still have her to
Yeah.
support me through this? So when was the moment when you had that conversation?
Um, it came from a really ugly place. I was saying really hurtful and harmful things to him. And it was full of blame and full of shame. And your audience, and you already know that when you lose someone to suicide, you're already in this weird mind trap of what ifs and should haves.
Mhm.
And I
Yeah.
could have done something. You're already in that place. And so I knew the moment I began to hurl really ugly words at him that we've got to change course, or this is going to end up falling apart.
Badly. Yeah.
Right. And he was so full of shame about it that he just took it. He just looked down and took everything that I said. And when I realized that I didn't like myself right then, and I certainly wasn't giving him a place to heal, we better come up with a plan. And it was kind of at that moment when I realized, actually, I want to save this and I want to do better. And so he was so compliant and so like, tell me what to do to fix this kind of
Yeah.
thing, that I came up with the plan. And he's like, okay, let's do that.
Yeah, but that's good. It's good that there
Yeah.
was one of you could do that. Yeah.
Yeah. But it came from, am I becoming this person that is saying these really awful things to the person I love? And that's when I realized, okay, I actually don't want to be that person. And I actually want to save this relationship. So that was the moment.
Yeah, yeah, and it's beautiful to hear you talk about this, because these are two adults. One is saying, I don't want to be this person who is resentful, who brings hatred into the marriage, and no
Mm-hmm.
understanding, no love or compassion, especially in a time like this. And the other one is saying,
Mm-hmm.
and I don't want to be the drunk. I don't want to be this
Right.
person who drinks through problems, right?
Right.
So you both were kind of begging each other to help and give me a path, and thankfully you found the path. And what was that path? And let's go into the second part of how can we help couples who are going through this. What helped?
Yeah. So this is going to look different for everybody, of course. We had to sort of almost immediately decide that we've got to have a safe, sacred space to be able to speak authentically and honestly with each other about what we're experiencing without hurting each other and without blaming and shaming. And so first of all, we had to create arena rules, right? Rules where we know that, okay, I'm not going to go there, and I want rules about who gets to speak, and that it's safe to express whatever you want, as long as it's not hurtful. So we started there. Then it became, we're both faith-based people, right? So we have a relationship with God. And so it was also like, we can't do this without our divine source helping us through this. And so I leaned heavily into my faith, and he leaned into his faith, which is the shared faith. But we kind of intentionally decided that on our own, we've got to come from a place that's bigger than us and bigger than what's going on in our hearts and minds, and be able to look at the big picture and find some hope again. So it started with creating a safe space. Then it became leaning into our faith individually, not together. And then therapy became a big piece of this. We went to therapy separately. And while he was mandated to go to therapy for part of his diversion, we started before then. So he began counseling therapy sessions on his own, and I began on my own. And that was another way to express ourselves in a safe space and really sort of process everything we're going through, and then come together and try and have a discussion from a place of awareness, right? And so we both went to our own counseling, and we did that for months and months and months. And we began to soften, our hearts began to soften again towards each other. And lastly, then we needed to, Steve needed a job, and we really wanted to stay in the community because we have family here. And so we created a nonprofit in which we provide healing and love and support to teachers. And it's called Wild Heart Teacher. And we hold retreats for teachers in the summer to rejuvenate and energize them. And so we found a goal for ourselves that was outside of Chris, outside of Ellen, outside of anything associated with the loss of Chris, that we could kind of, again, link arms and focus on something we both felt passionate about. So that was sort of our path. And it's not to say that it's perfect or that we don't still have challenges, but we're actually richer on the other side of this mess than we were before we lost Chris. And when you choose to be self-aware and emotionally intentional and giving grace and space for the other person, of course your relationship heals and becomes stronger. And so it had to get really bad before it got good, but it was intentional. I think that I could have very easily ended up on the couch again, not trying to feel, and he could have found some other coping mechanism. So I'm proud of us, actually. Again, it feels like a decade has gone by, but it's only been
it's
2
very
years.
current, right? Very, very new. So let me go back again. I'm very curious about as a therapist, I'm very curious about the double therapy. And okay, I'm just going to from what I understand, so the first thing to do was to set boundaries and find a safe places. This is where we're going to talk about this. These are some
Mm-hmm.
ground rules. Can we talk about the ground rules first?
Sure.
And then
Sure.
we'll continue from there. What were the
Yeah.
ground rules?
They were simple because they were prior to therapy beginning, but it, basically because the catalyst for this intentional choice was me speaking really ugly, hateful things to him. I had to these rules were almost more for me than for him. It was me saying, okay, I don't like what I just did there. I don't like what I said to you. And I certainly don't like the way I feel about it. And I don't think you liked receiving that. So the rule now from now on is that if someone has an emotion to express, they have to do it in a way that isn't harmful or painful, or at least intentionally harassing the other person.
Sure.
And the other person gets to respond freely and without interruption. So that was the first two rules. And that was mostly for me, to keep me from turning into the Tasmanian devil, you know. So
Tasmanian devil. It's cool that you say this, because this is actually one of the techniques that I don't do couples therapy, but I get, of course, patients who come to me and they have some problems in the relationship, and that's one of the things that I usually kind of teach them, quote unquote, but is to have this safe place, but have actually time put aside. Okay, every Tuesday during this conflict that we're going through, we're going to talk, and here are the rules. First, I talk in a respectful way, as you said. There has to be respect, but I'm going to talk for like 5 minutes and you just listen, no interruptions. And then the other one has the right to do the same, and you only listen, because many times it's just we interrupt so much, which means we're not listening. So if that's one of the ground rules, right? Okay, I'm going to talk for 5 minutes. 5 minutes is a lot. Try talking for 5 minutes.
It is a lot.
The other one will have to listen and try to be, as you said, intentional and really pay attention to your body, how you are reacting to it, and then you give that response. So it's a really very simple technique, but it does allow conversation and authenticity to play a role. So that was the first. Those are the like the ground rules. And then you went to therapy, and I'm very curious about this. So you're doing it not as a couple, not couples therapy. You're doing it individually. Would you also come back from some of the sessions and talk about what you went through during the session?
Not regularly, no. Okay. And so it was sort of a way for both of us to express ourselves freely, since we had created these rules, right? And that we needed to be respectful. But let's say in my therapy session, I needed to vent and grind my teeth and
all the
shake
things
my
you couldn't
fist.
say to him, you would say to the therapist.
Thank you. That's exactly what I could go full Tasmanian on my.
And they'll just go, whatever.
But also I'm a big advocate of therapy anyway. And so I've had 1,000 years of it in my lifetime. And so I believe that it's a wonderful way to process and grow, and that it isn't just a sounding board for emotions, but it actually is a way to take an emotion, process it, and flip it into a place of growth. And so I think that both of us had two different reasons and trauma for expressing ourselves independently. And so for that, it worked. And there were times when I'm like, how'd your session go? Do you want to talk about it? And he's like, not really. And I'm like, I don't either. So
better not.
So for us, it worked. It just did.
It does. I mean, of course, I'm very biased. I can't really say.
Of course.
I'm glad you said it all, because coming from me, it lands in differently. So, okay. So the first part was, let's talk about this respectfully. These are the ground rules. And then you did the therapy apart, but kind of together, because the intention was kind of the same driving force was there, right? And then the third part was, let's find purpose. Let's find purpose.
Well, there was another one in there. Okay. There was another one, and it was that faith-based piece.
Oh, the faith, yes.
Right. Sure. Just to take us out of our head and sort of get a bigger picture of the
Mm-hmm.
circumstances and sort of find hope. That's where I found hope there actually too.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
yeah. And then the last fourth thing was a mutual project we could do together.
Purpose, yeah.
A purpose, exactly. And it didn't have anything to do with Chris or
Mm-hmm.
losing the job or anything. It was like,
Mm-hmm.
wow, I really love doing this. And he was like, me too. So it was a nice sort of way to, again, redirect that energy, that fresh sort of perspective, and pour it into something that we were partners again in.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah.
Yeah, it's beautiful. Well, I have to apologize for my blind spot, the faith part.
That's okay. That's okay. That's all
my
right.
my listeners know that I'm not a faith person. I don't have any I don't follow any religion, so that I just kind of automatically erase that part, so sorry about
Yeah.
that.
It's okay. It's okay.
But I'm just thinking about your path here and how you guys, it's beautiful really to look at
Thank
it
you.
from the outside, because you first had to kind of clean the ground a little bit. Let's clean the ground.
Mm-hmm.
Let's
Mm-hmm.
undo what we are doing. Let's
Mm-hmm.
break that pattern and start something new. But then you had to
Mm-hmm.
deconstruct yourselves
Yeah.
and go through that internal process so that you could build something out of it with the help of
Mm-hmm.
your faith, right?
Mm-hmm.
As
Yeah.
a foundational force. That's
Yeah.
beautiful. Now
Thank
you're
you for
building
seeing
it.
it as, yeah, thank you for saying it's beautiful, because I'm actually really proud of us. And
Mm-hmm.
I think our story is unique, but not unique. And
Mm-hmm.
I believe because survivors of suicide, well, actually, the person who took their own life felt really isolated
Oh
generally
yeah,
at the
yeah.
moment that they did that. And then the family becomes very isolated because the general public, friends, faith community, everybody doesn't really know what to say and they're afraid to broach the subject. So you're sitting in isolation again. And
Mm.
so telling your story, no matter what it looks like, no matter the ugly parts and the
Mm-hmm.
good parts, I think is a really good way to connect people who are still sitting in that isolation of mourning
Yeah.
and not quite sure what the next step is. And so I'm privileged to share my story, even though it's embarrassing in some parts, but I think there's value in it. And
All the good stories are
yeah,
embarrassing.
yeah. So thank you for saying it was beautiful.
It is looking from the, of course, I mean, I'm looking from outside, and I'm sure it didn't look beautiful or feel beautiful to you, and still doesn't,
No.
because again, it's still very current. And I'm glad
Yeah.
you bring in Chris too, in terms of kind of highlighting what he was going through. I mean, I had an
Mm-hmm.
interview, it was like 2 interviews ago, with Linda Morrison. For those who are listening, you can go
Mm-hmm.
back and listen to that, because in the beginning you were talking about the addiction part, and that was our
Yeah.
focus then, and how
Mm-hmm.
isolated the family feels. But also, and mainly, that's one of the things that I did, because she also wrote a book, and it was
Mm-hmm.
mainly about this experience of losing her son. And in many parts of the books, there are things that he used to write when he was in so much pain. And he
Yeah.
talks about how isolated and how alone he felt with that pain, right? So
Yeah.
I'm glad you bring that up, because it's very important for you who
Yeah.
wants, if you want, for your listening and you want to understand more from their point of view, because there is this myth and this misconception of people who die by suicide, that they're such cowards, or that they're so selfish, and it's nothing. That is not it. So if you
Right.
have that image in your head and that idea, please erase it, and just replace it with more compassion.
Yeah, I
So
agree.
yeah, it's they go through hell, they're going through a
Mm-hmm.
lot of pain, and it's just easy for us to judge. So
Yeah.
thank you for saying that. I mean, there is
Yeah.
isolation, and again, unfortunately, so the family goes through that after the loss too.
And as a person who has been in faith communities my whole life, there is a a false set of rules out there that says that anyone who takes their life doesn't get to go to heaven. And that is a heartbreaking thing to say. I don't know who made up that rule. It's not in the
It's not
Bible.
written
I don't know.
anywhere. I know, because I have an interview about
No.
that. It's not anywhere.
Of course it isn't. And so it is a cruel thing. And I had an 83-year-old woman say to my face when I told her that I lost Chris, she said, well, that's too bad. He's not going to be in heaven. And I
Mm,
forgave her immediately because I knew it came from a place of ignorance. But I told her, I don't believe that. I know for a fact where he is. And because I'm a person of faith and I have an idea of what's going to happen after I pass, or at least a knowing in my
mhm,
gut that I'm going to
mhm.
see him again, I reject that statement and I don't
I'm
believe
glad you
it.
stood up for yourself. Yeah,
I
I'm
did, and it
glad.
felt good. And she knew better than to argue with me. But I'm going to bring this around to my book, if you don't mind.
Of
At the
course. Yeah.
end of I wrote a fiction book, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the fiction book is my love letter to the LGBTQ plus community. I am an advocate, an ally, and a member of that community. And so I felt really strongly that faith and religion, Christianity specifically, have been used to marginalize and discriminate against this group of people in particular. And so I
Mm-hmm.
wanted to entertain the idea of, what if Jesus himself were able to come down and go, look, I don't have a problem with people being gay at all. And in
Mm-hmm.
fact,
Or
it doesn't matter.
transgender or asexual or
Exactly.
whatever they want to be.
All of the labels, right? And then
Mm-hmm.
I don't care how you decorate your locker. I care how you walk with me in the hallways, kind of premise. So that was the premise of my book. And pardon me. So the book is divided into two plot lines. One is a murder investigation of a young gay man, and the other plot line is this young gay man, after he passed, is having a conversation with Jesus in Mount Hope
Mm.
Cemetery. And during that conversation, Jesus just pours love and validation into this community. But at the end of the book, not only is the crime solved, but Jesus and the young victim then are going to enter into heaven. Their mission is done. They got this message out, right?
Yeah.
And in the heaven scene, there is a crowd of people before them, and my Chris is in there.
Oh.
And my Chris was African American, beautiful, beautiful young man with a big giant smile, and he was the caretaker of the dog of the victim. And so the
Mm.
victim's like, who is that person, and why is my dog around him? And Jesus says, oh, that's Chris. He was the caretaker of your dog while we was waiting for you to get here. And it's this simple little tiny scene that was completely cathartic to me to put him
Oh.
there. And
Mm.
hope is so defiant that I not only wanted to pour hope and healing into this marginalized community, but I also wanted to speak to the fact that that woman said to me, your son is not in heaven because of the desperate choice he made.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I don't believe that. And I wrote him in that heaven scene. He's
It's
healed,
beautiful.
healed and whole and young and not lost anymore. And that is a defiant form of hope. I read, there's so many gatekeepers for the LGBTQ plus community, and the same people who would reject them in the church are the same people who would have rejected my son into heaven because of his choice of desperation.
Mm-hmm.
And so my book at the end sort of nods to those two
Yeah.
forms of
Yeah.
hope. And it was healing for me to write it. When I picked my book back up again, because when I was in crisis, not
Mm.
only mourning the loss of my child, but my marriage,
Mm-hmm.
it all creativity was gone. I couldn't write, I couldn't play the guitar, I
Mm.
couldn't go for walks or even eat healthy. I just wasn't taking care of myself.
Yeah.
And when I was on the other side of it and could engage in writing again, I wanted to use that creative energy to honor Chris.
Yeah.
And I think that might be number 5 of my list of healing
Yeah.
things to
Yeah.
do, is to, because lots of people have creative outlets of singing or
Mm-hmm.
writing poetry or quilting or gardening. Maybe doing something for the one they lost is a part of their healing, pouring your creative energy into that once you get it back. So that may be number 5 of my list of healing things to do for Kellie.
Perfect. Yeah.
And I am really, really proud. I actually wrote a blog post about who is Chris on page 356, right? Because he wasn't a character in the book, and all of a
He
sudden
shows
Jesus
up
is
out of nowhere,
naming him. Yeah,
taking care of a dog.
Jesus knows him exactly, knows him by name. And so I'm like, no, I wrote a blog post about it and said, this is my son, and this is why I
Yeah.
put him in my book. So that's
I
kind
can
of
I
the
can't
full
think of
circle.
any I can think of anything more beautiful in terms of life's mission than to take care of dogs when they're
Right?
waiting in heaven. It's beautiful. It's
I
just
know.
perfect way of honoring your son.
Yeah.
So to end, Kelly, what is the name of the book? I'm going to have a link for those who are
Thank you.
interested. So just go to my notes and I'll have the link there. I'll have the link to her website as well. And
Super.
for those of you who maybe need to talk to someone about this, or maybe the teachers who want to be involved with in this beautiful work that they do together now, because we know how hard it has been for teachers lately. I'll
Mm-hmm.
have that website too. So
Thank you.
yeah, just send some help out
Okay.
there. So
So let me tell you where to find it. So I do have a website called kelliewolf.com, which is obviously my name. And that is where my blog posts are. The book will be linked to Amazon, newsletter. I also have pictures of the characters and a song list. And so kind of all things about my book. My book is called Mount Hope. It is going to be launched on Tuesday, June 21st. And you can find it, you can go through my website, but you can go straight to Amazon and you can find the hardcover, the soft cover, and the Kindle version available. And I'd be very honored to talk to anybody in your audience who just wants to sort of link arms in your healing. And I know you feel isolated sometimes, and so I'll link arms with you and stand beside you. So communicate with me any way you want, and I'm on all social media too.
yeah, so it's going to be launched actually in a few days. So by the time this interview
Yeah.
is published, it will be there. So I'll have the link to Amazon and all of that. Okay.
Super.
Kelly, thank you so much for your
Thank you,
words of
Paula.
wisdom and sharing your story with us. I'm sure
Thank
it's
you for
going to help
allowing me
so
to.
many people. Thank you.
Thank you. Good day to you.
You too.